Welcome to Dark Horror Diaries, my friend. Before the show starts, do write below where are you from. Let's go. The house had always felt strange to me. Ever since we moved in, back when I was just a kid, there had been something unsettling about it. My parents had brushed it off. It's just an old house, they'd say. But I knew better. It was too big, too quiet. The kind of place that seems to breathe on its own. My parents were busy with their own lives, and I spent most of my time alone. As I grew older, I came to realize that the house wasn't just old, it was hiding something. Something I couldn't explain. That weekend, when they left for a trip to visit family, it was just me and the house. My older brother was off at college, and my younger sister had gone to a friend's place. I was home alone for the first time in a while, and at first I was excited. The house, with its creaking floors and dark corners, was my domain now. It wasn't as though I was afraid of it. At least, not in the way my parents thought. But there was always this nagging feeling, like something was just out of sight, watching. I had gotten used to the odd noises over the years. The taps and rumbles that came from the walls, the whistling of wind through the gaps in the windows. But that weekend, they were different. Louder, almost deliberate. It was just past midnight when I first heard it. A faint scratching sound coming from above. The attic. I'd never paid much attention to it, really. The entrance was tucked away behind a panel in the hallway, and the stairs were narrow, almost hidden. But that night, something about the noise pulled me toward it. I stood in front of the panel, my hand hovering over the latch. The scratching continued. It wasn't like a mouse or a raccoon. This was something deliberate. It sent a chill down my spine. My cat, Whiskers, who had been lounging in my room, suddenly bolted from the door and raced down the hallway, hissing as he went. I stood frozen for a moment, my heart pounding in my chest. I shouldn't have gone up there. I knew that now. But at the time, curiosity had its grip on me. The attic door creaked as I slid the panel open. The air inside was stale, heavy with dust. I grabbed the flashlight from the drawer by the stairs and began the slow climb. Each step groaned under my weight, the sounds echoing through the dark house. When I reached the top, I paused, listening. The scratching had stopped. I swept the beam of the flashlight across the attic. The room was cluttered with old furniture and boxes, things that had been there long before I was born. But something was different. In the corner, just beneath the rafters, I saw it. A small trapdoor partially hidden by a stack of old blankets. I didn't remember it being there before. The space seemed untouched, but there was something off about it. Something that told me I was standing in the middle of a secret. My pulse quickened as I approached the trapdoor, my mind racing with possibilities. Could someone have been living up here? But that didn't make sense. I was sure the attic had been locked up. My family didn't use it. I reached for the latch, my fingers trembling. As I lifted the door, a rush of cold air hit me, and then I saw it. Scattered on the floor, as if someone had been living there. Blankets, food wrappers, empty cans. But the most chilling thing of all was a Polaroid picture, face down on the floor. I turned it over slowly. My face stared back at me. It was taken while I was sleeping from a position above. My blood ran cold. Whoever had been up here watching me had been doing it for a long time. The room around me spun. The picture felt like it weighed 1,000 pounds in my hand. I dropped it instantly, the edges curling as it landed with a soft thud on the dusty floor. My mind raced, trying to process what I had just discovered. Someone had been living in my house without me knowing. The thought made my skin crawl, a cold sweat breaking out across my forehead. The attic was supposed to be empty, forgotten. But now I saw it for what it truly was, a secret, a hideaway for someone who had been watching me, tracking my every move. I turned quickly, my footsteps echoing in the empty space. I needed to get out of there to go somewhere safe. My room. The comfort of the familiar. But as I rushed back toward the stairs, I heard it. A faint noise, almost like breathing, coming from behind me. I froze. My heart thudded in my chest as I scanned the attic, my flashlight beam darting from corner to corner. There was nothing, only shadows. I swallowed hard, trying to steady my breath, but the sensation of being watched hung heavy in the air. My hand gripped the railing as I hurried down the stairs. I had to get my phone, call someone. Call the police. But when I reached the landing, I realized something worse. My phone was gone. Panic surged through me. I checked every pocket, my heart racing as I searched in vain. It wasn't anywhere. I could feel my pulse pounding in my ears. Who had taken it? Whoever had been in the attic. The thought was maddening. I dashed back to my room, hoping to find it there. The door was slightly ajar, but I distinctly remembered locking it before I went upstairs. My fingers shook as I pushed it open, the hinges groaning in protest. The room was dark, but everything appeared in place. Except for one thing. The closet door was cracked open, and from inside I could hear it. Breathing. Slow, deliberate breaths. A sound that wasn't mine. I stopped dead in my tracks, a chill running down my spine. "Hello?" I called out, trying to sound braver than I felt. No response. Just that slow, steady breathing. It was too rhythmic, too controlled. I took a step forward, my stomach twisting. Was it possible someone was in there? Someone who had been hiding in my closet the whole time? I reached for the door, my fingers brushing the handle. The breath stopped. Complete silence. A wave of nausea hit me. I couldn't move. My body was frozen like I was paralyzed by fear. And then, just as I was about to turn and run, I felt it. A sudden, icy presence behind me. Something moved in the shadows, a shape larger than my own. I whipped around, only to find nothing. But I wasn't alone. I could feel it, creeping up my spine. A whisper in the air, soft and insistent. "Ethan," a voice rasped from the closet. It wasn't my own voice. It was deeper, unsettlingly calm, and it sent a surge of terror through me. I didn't know what to do. My legs felt weak, my brain screaming at me to run, but I couldn't. Then the voice spoke again, this time louder. "I've been watching you for years." The door to the closet creaked open just enough for a pair of hands to reach out. They were long, thin fingers stretching out like spider legs. They grasped my arm with an iron grip, pulling me toward the dark space. I fought against it, but the strength of the hands was overpowering, their grip relentless. A twisted face peeked out from the darkness. Gaunt, wild-eyed, and smeared with dirt. A grin stretched unnaturally wide across his face, but his eyes. They were the worst part. They weren't human anymore. They gleamed with something dark, something broken. "I've been here all along," he whispered, his voice almost a hiss. "You never noticed me, but I noticed you." His grip tightened as he pulled me closer. I shoved with every ounce of strength I had, kicking, thrashing, anything to break free. For a moment, I thought I had escaped, but the man's voice rang in my ears, sending another wave of terror through me. "Don't worry, Ethan," he chuckled darkly. "I'll take good care of you. Soon, you'll be just like me." My mind raced as I struggled to breathe, trying to make sense of the nightmare unfolding before me. Who was this man? And why had he been living in my house? And most importantly, why me? I pulled away, my hands slick with sweat as I struggled to break free from the man's grasp. His fingers dug deeper into my arm, each touch sending jolts of terror through my body. He was too strong, and my body was too weak from the shock of it all. But there was one thing I knew. I wasn't going to let him take me. I had to fight, had to survive. "Let me go," I shouted, my voice raw with panic. My words felt hollow in the air, but they gave me a flicker of resolve. I kicked at him, my foot connecting with his chest, and for a moment he faltered. It was enough to create a gap between us. I didn't waste a second. I scrambled back toward the door, my heart hammering in my chest, my feet stumbling on the floor as I moved. Every breath felt shallow, like my lungs couldn't keep up with the panic surging through me. I had to get out of this room, had to escape. But when I reached the door, it wouldn't open. I twisted the handle frantically, but it was stuck. Jammed. "Ethan," the man called out, his voice too calm, too patient. It was as if he was savoring my terror. "You can't run. You can't hide." I spun around, my back against the door, eyes darting around the room for something. Anything. That could help. There was nothing. My brain was scrambling, trying to make sense of it all, trying to figure out how I could stop this man. I couldn't think straight. The only thing that mattered now was escaping. I needed to get out. A soft thud came from behind me. I whirled around, but the closet door was still open. Empty. I didn't know if it was his voice still echoing in my mind, or if he had disappeared into the shadows, but something told me he wasn't gone. He was still here, still watching. And then I remembered. The trapdoor in the attic. The hidden space where I had found the Polaroid. The place where this all began. The attic. I wasn't going to let him win. I had to take control back somehow. I ran for the stairs, adrenaline coursing through me. My feet barely touched the floor as I ascended, each step heavier than the last, the weight of fear pressing on me with every motion. I didn't know where he was, but I couldn't stop moving. I couldn't let him catch me again. The attic was the only place I hadn't searched thoroughly. The place where he had been living. If I could make it there, maybe I could trap him. Maybe I could find a way to get out of this alive. The steps creaked beneath me as I climbed, but I didn't care. I threw open the attic door with a force that startled me. The dim light from the hallway revealed nothing but shadows. Empty corners, discarded furniture, old boxes. It looked like an abandoned space. But I knew better now. I knew there were secrets hidden here. I moved quickly, searching the floor, the walls, anything. And that's when I saw it. The trapdoor. The one I had missed earlier. The one that led to whatever darkness was hiding inside this house. My hand trembled as I pulled it open, revealing the dark crawl space below. I climbed in without hesitation, my legs shaking as I lowered myself into the small, confined area. But something stopped me. A noise. A faint sound of shuffling, of movement in the dark. I wasn't alone. "Ethan," the voice whispered again, so close it made my skin crawl. "I'm here." The voice echoed around me, sending a ripple of cold fear through my veins. I froze in place, my breath catching in my throat. It couldn't be him. He was supposed to be downstairs, or at least somewhere else. But the voice came from the shadows, from somewhere near. I couldn't see him, but I could feel his presence closing in, the air thickening with his proximity. I pressed myself deeper into the crawl space, the walls pressing in on me from all sides. The floorboards above creaked under some invisible weight. I thought I heard a whisper from behind me, a soft rustle of movement. My heart raced, and I slowly, carefully turned my head. There he was. His pale face emerged from the dark, eyes wide and bloodshot, a twisted grin curling at the edges of his lips. His clothes were tattered, stained with grime and sweat. He didn't move at first, just stood there, watching me like a predator eyeing its prey. For a moment, I couldn't move, couldn't breathe. He had been here all along, hiding, waiting for this moment. "You're too late," he muttered, his voice rasping as if it had been years since he last spoke. "I've already been inside your head." I couldn't shake the feeling that he had been watching me longer than I realized, that everything I had experienced, the strange noises, the missing food, the sense of being followed, had all been part of his twisted game. My mind raced, trying to make sense of it all. Why me? Why my house? He stepped closer, his eyes never leaving mine. Every instinct in my body screamed at me to run, but the crawl space was too narrow, and I was trapped. There was nowhere to go. My hands fumbled in the dark for something. Anything. That could protect me, but there was nothing. I had to think, had to do something. Suddenly, my mind flashed back to the attic. The hidden door. I didn't know where it led, but I knew it was my only chance. It was a small glimmer of hope in the suffocating darkness. If I could reach it, maybe I could escape him. Maybe I could force him out of my home, out of my life. But as I made to move toward it, his hand shot out, grabbing my wrist with a vice-like grip. His nails dug into my skin, and I winced, fighting back the pain. "You can't leave," he hissed, his voice low and dangerous. "You'll never leave." I tugged, pulling against him with all my strength. My pulse pounded in my ears, the sound of my breath heavy in the narrow space. This was it. There was no more time to think. No more room for doubt. I couldn't let him win. With a final burst of strength, I yanked my arm free, my nails scraping against his skin. I didn't care. I didn't care about the pain. I turned and bolted for the trapdoor, diving into the dark space below without a second thought. I landed hard on the floor, my body colliding with the ground. But there was no time to recover. I scrambled to my feet, heart pounding in my chest as I reached for the hidden exit. His voice followed me. "You think you can escape me? You think you can just leave?" But I didn't stop. I couldn't stop. I didn't know where I was going, but I had to keep moving. The crawl space was small, the air stale and suffocating, but it was my only chance, and I wasn't going to let him take it from me. I crawled deeper into the dark, the walls closing in around me. The only thing that mattered now was getting out. The crawl space seemed endless, the low ceiling pressing down on me as I scrambled through the narrow tunnel. My body ached with every movement, bruises forming where I scraped against the rough wood, but I couldn't stop. My breath came in shallow gasps, my heart thudding in my chest. Every shadow seemed to hold a pair of eyes. Every creak of the house felt like footsteps behind me. But the worst part was the silence. It pressed in on me, suffocating, as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. I kept pushing forward, my hands digging into the dust and dirt that caked the floor. The old, musty scent of the walls filled my nose, making my stomach churn, but I kept going. There was no turning back now. I could hear his voice again, distant but clear. "You can't escape me. You're already mine." It sent a jolt of terror through me, but I didn't look back. I couldn't afford to. I had to keep moving. I had to get to the attic, to the place where I had discovered the hidden space. The only place in the house that seemed untouched, a possible way out. As I rounded a corner, I came to a small opening, barely large enough to fit through. I hesitated for a moment, my fingers brushing against the edges of the tunnel, but I didn't stop. I forced myself through the gap, my chest tight as I pressed against the walls. I could almost hear him behind me, his footsteps so close I thought they might be my own. Suddenly, I heard a loud crack. The sound of wood splintering, followed by a low noise that made my stomach drop. I froze, fear tightening my throat. He was getting closer. I pushed forward, desperate now, until I finally saw the faint light of the attic trapdoor ahead. I could almost taste freedom, but I knew it wasn't over yet. He was still out there, and if I didn't act quickly, he would catch me. I reached the trapdoor and yanked it open, gasping as the fresh air hit me. The attic smelled of dust and old wood, a familiar scent that somehow felt like safety. I climbed out, my hands shaking as I pulled myself into the attic, and slammed the door shut behind me. For a moment, I just stood there, trying to calm my racing heart. The attic was cold, the silence almost deafening, but it felt safer here. The walls were thicker, the floor solid under my feet. I could hear him now, but he was below me, downstairs, somewhere in the house. I had a moment to breathe, to think. I scanned the attic. The space was cluttered, filled with old furniture covered in dusty sheets, cardboard boxes stacked haphazardly in the corners. But there was nothing I could use to defend myself. No tools, no weapons. I was on my own. Then I saw it. A small window, cracked and covered with cobwebs. It was the only way out. I rushed to it, pulling away the old curtain and shoving the frame open. The night air rushed in, cold and fresh, but it was too high. There was no way to climb out without some kind of ladder or rope. I cursed under my breath, my mind racing for a solution. I could hear him again. His footsteps, slow and deliberate, coming closer. "I'll be there soon," he called, his voice barely a whisper. "You can't run forever." I had no more time. The weight of his words hung in the air like a suffocating fog. He was close. I could hear the creak of the floorboards beneath him, the sound of his boots dragging across the old wood, deliberate and slow. My pulse quickened, but I couldn't let myself panic. Not now. I had to think. There had to be something in this attic that could help me. I glanced around frantically. The room was cluttered with forgotten relics of the past. Old chairs, faded photographs, boxes filled with God knows what. Nothing of use. My hand tightened around the window frame as I considered my options. Escape was my only chance. The air outside the window felt cool against my fingertips, a stark contrast to the heat building in my chest. The night was quiet, too quiet. I could almost hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. The ground below was several feet down, and I could already feel my legs protesting at the thought of jumping. But there was no other choice. I had to get out. The sound of footsteps grew louder, closer now, the ominous rhythm of his pursuit filling my ears. I gritted my teeth, willing myself not to freeze. The window was my only way out, but I needed to be quick. I climbed onto the edge of the floor, my heart pounding in my chest. For a moment, I hesitated, staring out into the dark night beyond. The trees loomed in the distance, shadows stretching long across the ground. I could make it. But then I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a door creaking open. He was in the attic. My breath hitched, panic rising in my throat. I needed to move. Now. Without thinking, I pushed myself through the window, the cool night air rushing past me as I dropped to the ground. My legs buckled beneath me as I landed, the impact sending sharp pain through my knees. But I didn't stop. I scrambled to my feet, stumbling through the overgrown grass, the house looming behind me like a shadow. I didn't dare look back. My breath came in ragged gasps as I ran, my muscles screaming from the sudden exertion. The night was dark, but I didn't need to see. I knew the way. Through the trees, across the small creek, and down the narrow path to the road. The sound of footsteps followed me, distant at first, but growing louder with every passing second. My heart raced. I couldn't outrun him forever. And then I heard something else. Something that stopped me dead in my tracks. A voice, soft and cold, carried on the wind. "I'm not done with you, Ethan." It was Alan. His voice, low and mocking, echoed through the trees. I couldn't see him, but I knew he was out there, waiting. I pushed myself harder, forcing my legs to move faster, as if I could outrun the terror that had taken root in my chest. The trees blurred around me, the dark silhouettes of branches reaching out like fingers. I had to keep going. I couldn't stop. And then, as if by some miracle, I saw headlights in the distance. A car. I ran toward it, waving my arms frantically. The car screeched to a halt beside me, the door flying open. A familiar face looked out. Officer Harris, the local sheriff. "Get in," he shouted. I didn't hesitate. I jumped into the car, slamming the door behind me, my breath coming in ragged gasps. As the car sped away, I glanced back at the house, the shadows of the trees swallowing it whole. "We've got you," Officer Harris said, his voice reassuring. "You're safe now." But as I stared out the window at the dark night, the voice of Alan still echoed in my mind, cold and cruel. "I'm not done with you, Ethan." The house would always be with me, and so would Alan. One time my parents had left for work. My sisters had gone to school, and I, 20 female, was alone at home. My neighborhood is in a fairly secluded area, situated on top of a huge hill, so it's fairly rare to have anyone visit. I was lounging around watching TV when I heard the doorbell ring. I never answer the door as, again, we never have anyone visiting and my family obviously know how to get in the house themselves. So I ignored it, even when it rang a second time. By the third time, I was a little annoyed, and I tiptoed over to the front door. The front entrance of our house is essentially a big wooden door surrounded by wall, so there isn't any way for us to check who's on the outside, unless we go to our piano room and check out the window. This means there's also no way for anyone on the outside to know if we're there, unless we're stomping around in the house. So I stood behind the front door, waiting for the person to leave. I mean, no one has answered your third door bell ring, surely you'd leave, right? Suddenly, there was heavy banging on the door, which made me jump. I heard a deep man's voice speak from the other side of the door. "I know you're in there." My heart jumped and got caught in my throat, and for a second, I'm looking around, trying to figure out how the man knew. After a long silence, I heard muffled chatter, then the sound of footsteps leaving. I didn't dare to open the door in case they actually hadn't left. After, I called my parents to check if anyone was meant to be visiting. No, not that we know of. I was a little surprised by the odd encounter, but eventually I went back to watching TV and soon forgot about it. 2 hours later, I hear the doorbell ring again. Feeling a sense of nervousness, I turned down the TV volume. This time I got up slowly and snuck over to the piano room where I could possibly sneak a peek and see who is there. I knelt down and slowly raised my head over the sill to see. At the door was a woman dressed in all black high heels, a plain black dress which came down to mid-calf, and an unusually large brimmed black hat, which was bizarre considering it was summertime and very hot. She had long dark brown hair, though her face was covered by the brim of her hat. The only thing I could see were her bright red lips pulled up in an eerily wide smile. Beside her was a tall, buff guy wearing a dark suit. I don't remember much of his features, except that he was a Caucasian man and had a very serious expression. What disturbed me most wasn't so much the intimidating guy, but the sight of the woman who stood there literally unmoving, smiling at the front door which was yet to be opened. It felt like a solid minute before she finally took a step back, and without a word began to walk down the driveway. The man followed her step. To this day, I'm not sure who she was, why they were at the door, and whether they were the ones which had knocked at the door earlier. But needless to say, the deep voice calling, "I know you're in there," and the image of the woman in black was not one I forgot easily. I'm 29 female, and while I'm well-traveled and have been around quite a bit, I do occasionally make some pretty rookie mistakes. My fault, and I make no excuses. I try to remain diligent and alert, but I'm very capable of letting my guard down. So after being here in the US for about 2 months, I decided that I was bored sitting around my unit watching 90 Day Fiancé, so I decided to make the old dating profiles again. I made no specific intentions known about what I was interested in accomplishing, as I don't really know myself. I just wanted someone to hang out with and see where it goes naturally. I ended up matching with this one bloke who had shared interests with me. We chatted a bit over the app, and eventually I felt okay to give him my number. After talking back and forth for a couple of weeks, I agreed to a meetup. We met at a pub and have a couple of drinks. I'll admit at first I didn't recognize him because he didn't resemble his photos to the extent that I was expecting. He didn't look bad by any means, but I could tell that he used older pictures and edited them enough to where he seemed more appealing. I swear I'm not trying to sound superficial because he was cute, just not what I was expecting. But I also think we've hit a point in social media culture where it's safe to assume that we won't see the same thing in real life as we do online, and that's okay. We did hit it off. We discussed the usual first date stuff, then we got into more detail. I told him about back home and work, and how life was different than here in the States. At one point we were talking and holding hands, and I felt comfortable enough to let him kiss me. Well, he asked me as we were leaving if I wanted to go back to his place for a cup of coffee. I told him I knew what coffee really meant, and that I didn't want to do that on a first date. He assured me it would be 1 cup of coffee, and that he would give me a lift home so that I didn't have to call an Uber. I accepted his offer, and we walked to his apartment, which was a few blocks away. As we were going upstairs, he made a few questionable remarks. He mentioned how I wasn't like most girls because I accepted his invitation and alluded that, "You never know, I could be a psychopath." He then motioned with his eyes down to my dress and inquired about my titty size. I told him again that I was sorry, but the night would not end with him getting lucky. As we got into his unit, he dismissed himself to the toilet and left me sitting on his bed. It was a studio, and he didn't have a couch. As I'm sitting there and waiting for him to finish doing whatever he was actually doing, I notice in the corner by his bed that he had 2 masks. One was a cartoon-looking goat mask, and another was a cat, or maybe a tiger. What was more alarming was that he also had a Bowie knife and a small woodcutter's axe only a short distance away from them. Upon further observation, I also noticed there was a black jumper draped over a dresser. Then on his bedside table, there were a pair of latex gloves. Yawns. Okay, I don't much feel like being murdered tonight. I got up and calmly left the unit. Then I made haste down the stairs and down the street, where I was able to catch a lift. Now look, I may have just really hurt his feelings because he had no malicious intent. But if that's all that happened, then I'd prefer that over the possible alternative. All of these items alone wouldn't have been that bad. But all of these random items within a short walk from each other, I'd rather just not chance it. I do feel bad for leaving a person, but I don't feel bad about leaving what could have potentially been a dangerous situation. That, along with his random personality change, was enough for me to make the call that I made. As of recently, I noticed that he either blocked me from Tinder or deleted the app. This happened about 6 years ago, in 2016. Let me provide all the necessary background info to illustrate what happened. I was 18 at the time, had moved back to Portland, Oregon for college as an escape from the 8-year hellhole that was my life in San Diego, California. I grew up with a single mom most of my life, so I moved around a lot. I had lived in Vancouver, Washington, and the greater Portland area for a few years prior to moving to San Diego. So when I needed an escape to leave SoCal as soon as I graduated, going to college out of state was the only option. I applied to Portland State University 2 weeks prior to the submission deadline, and I, of course, got in. I arrived to Portland a good 6 weeks prior to school starting since I had some academic programs I got in that required an earlier presence to establish some ground before school started. So there I was, 18 years old, returning nostalgically to what I called home, living in the Broadway freshman student housing. I took in my sense of freedom by going on late-night walks around the park blocks, to Rocket Fizz or Voodoo Donut, just about anywhere. Now I have listened to true crime podcasts, watched a lot of true crime since I was in elementary school thanks to my ex-sheriff mom who told jail stories for bedtime. So I should have known better than to do what I did. I was notorious among my friends for the style I adopted even in the autumn weather Portland has, and I would wear a long XXL shirt, no pants, sneakers, and a clear transparent bag, yes, where you can clearly see my wallet, and that I had an weapon everywhere I went. Even on my 11 p.m., 4 a.m. walks alone. This story is about one of those lonesome, late-night walks. I found a decent parking garage I would walk to most nights, near SW 6th and Jefferson in downtown. I would chain smoke into the night, no issues on any situation, but this one night. It was about 1 a.m. and 2 a.m. at this time. I was heading back to my dorm slightly tipsy, slightly high, and slightly nauseous from that post-Marlboro menthol smoking sesh. I had passed my friends up on a party at University Point that day, so all my immediate contacts were inebriated at a party not too far from where I was. I found myself walking down SW 6th Ave alone, eerie given it was a Saturday night. Not a car or person in sight. I had both headphones in, focusing on not feeling coldness and heading home. Suddenly, a car speeds up to where I am, 2 men hop out and both go on each side of me. I pause my music and act as if I am not freaked the hell out. I am visibly intoxicated and probably smell as faded as I was. Let me also mention that at this point in my life, I had shaved my head near bald, was about 135 pounds, and wore large shirts. I could have been a pantsless male for all they could have known. "Hey, how are you? Where you headed? You seem a bit drunk." The guy on the left says. I shoot him daggers as much as I can all while trying to assure I can still walk straight. "I'm just trying to make it home tonight," I say back. The guy on the right says, "We can help, or we can take you to our home. Where is home to you?" I ignore him and keep my pace. I didn't believe in God then, but was praying in my head. I made it home, promising whoever I was praying to that I wouldn't be so stupid being out late, alone, under the influence again. Both give each other a look, and they start walking slower, now following behind me. I keep my pace and calculate how far I am, where my resident hall keycard was, and how fast I could possibly run while making it to the building without being caught by the 2 men on foot or their accomplices in the car. Before I could mentally provide myself those answers, the car screeches back, and they hop in, speeding off. I count my lucky stars while running back. I head to Max, a liquor store me and the gang used to chain smoke at. I call campus security and relay all to them, and to my horror, I'm told I am the 13th call with such a report that week. I head back inside to my dorm, awaiting my friends to tell them what had just occurred. Oh, but the story doesn't end here. Fast forward to July 2017. I had dropped out of college by the first semester, went back to San Diego for a few months, and officially moved me and my family all up to Portland. We were pretty settled in our cozy apartment, where we watched the news. My heart sank to my stomach, and I felt like I was going to vomit. There on the news, trafficking ring in the next city over was busted. Quite a few faces shown to who was arrested. They were mostly women, with only a handful of men shown. I recognized 2 faces, the 2 being the men from that night. Yes, I was tipsy and yes, I was high, but I knew those faces for sure. I called PPD and provided them with the information, with them verifying some call-ins around the time period of mine or how some of the members chose to abduct. Why they didn't abduct me, I'll never know. All I know is that I'm grateful. So, to the 2S, traffickers who preyed on me. But let me get away, let's not meet again. It wasn't the first time I'd come back to this old house. In fact, I had grown up here, but every return felt like stepping into a place I didn't recognize anymore. My grandmother, Evelyn, had lived here for as long as I could remember. The house stood in a quiet corner of the countryside, nestled against a forest that seemed to whisper in the wind. My parents, away for a week on some kind of vacation, had asked me to care for her while they were gone. They didn't really need to ask. I didn't have a job, just school. A few days wouldn't hurt. Evelyn hadn't spoken for years. A stroke left her paralyzed, her mind sharp but trapped in a body that refused to obey. I knew her routines. I knew how to help her get dressed, feed her, and move her from place to place. It was hard to imagine her any different than the frail, silent woman who sat in her chair by the window, eyes dimmed but full of memories. The house had always been dark, both figuratively and literally. It creaked and groaned in ways that made it feel alive, like it was always watching me. But it was more than just the old wood and rusted pipes. There were stories. Stories that my parents had dismissed as old family rumors, but I heard them all the same. They said that the house had been the site of a failed exorcism in the 1940s. The boy they tried to save never left the house. They said he disappeared, but I had always wondered if he was still here. I didn't believe in ghosts, at least not like that. But even as I went about my daily tasks, the house felt heavier. The halls were too silent, too still, and the air smelled of something ancient. The night I arrived, the power flickered out for a moment. I brushed it off, blaming it on the storm, but when the lights flickered again, it felt like something more. Something that had been waiting. My first night in the house was uneventful. I got Evelyn settled in her room and made sure she had everything she needed. When I went to bed, I told myself I was just being silly. The house was just old, and there was nothing more to it than that. But then the lights flickered again, this time at exactly 3:13 a.m. The same time the exorcism had taken place all those years ago. I sat up in bed, my heart pounding, but I tried to ignore it. Old houses had quirks, right? Old houses had noises. That's all. But then, something I didn't expect happened. Evelyn, who hadn't said a word in years, whispered something. A croaky, raspy sound like the whisper of a voice that had been buried in the depths of time. "He's here," she said. I froze. My grandmother's voice had not sounded like that in years. I jumped out of bed, my mind racing. What did she mean? Who was she talking about? But when I turned to her, her eyes were closed again, her hands resting on the armrests of her wheelchair as she always did. It wasn't possible. She hadn't spoken. Not in so long. Yet I could still hear the echo of her words ringing in my head. It was too much to ignore, but I tried. I told myself it was just a dream. I had to keep going. It was just a bad night, right? But as I sat back down, I couldn't shake the feeling that someone was watching me. The following day, I tried to brush off the events of the night before. After all, Evelyn had been through so much, maybe it was a side effect of her condition. But the strange occurrences didn't stop. I went about my usual routine, making sure Evelyn had her breakfast, helping her with her medication, and making sure she was as comfortable as possible. But no matter how hard I tried to focus, I couldn't get rid of the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Around noon, I noticed something strange in the kitchen. The fridge, which I had stocked with food the night before, was slightly open. It wasn't much, just a crack, but when I went to close it, I realized something was missing. A few items had vanished. Nothing that couldn't be explained by a mistake or maybe even an absent-minded slip, but still I couldn't help but feel a chill run down my spine. I didn't want to think about it, but it was getting harder to ignore. It wasn't just the food. In the evening, as I was reading in the living room, I heard faint tapping sounds coming from the ceiling. It wasn't the usual creaking of the old house. It was something deliberate. 3 quick taps, followed by silence. I froze. My pulse quickened, but when I looked up, I saw nothing out of the ordinary. I tried to chalk it up to the house settling, but the feeling lingered. By nightfall, I was more jumpy than I cared to admit. I kept hearing things. Whispers in the wind, the faint scratching of something in the walls. The house, it seemed, was alive with its own secrets. But the worst part came when I went to bed. As I pulled the covers up to my chin, I noticed the bedroom door. I'd locked it before going to bed, but now it was slightly ajar. I got up to check it, but there was nothing. Nothing except the overwhelming sense that I wasn't alone. I quickly closed the door, but the air felt thick, suffocating. I couldn't explain it. My mind kept racing back to the stories I had heard as a child. The failed exorcism, the boy who had disappeared, and the rumors that his spirit never left. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really, but now, sitting in the dark, I wasn't so sure. Later that evening, I sat with Evelyn in her room, trying to keep my thoughts from spiraling. She looked so small in that big chair, her frail hands resting in her lap. As I adjusted the blanket around her shoulders, I noticed something strange. She was staring at the attic door, her eyes wide with fear. I followed her gaze, my stomach tightening. The attic. I had always avoided it, not because of any specific reason, but because it felt wrong. It was just an attic, a dusty old space filled with old furniture and forgotten memories. But something about it never sat well with me. Evelyn suddenly let out a low moan, her voice trembling. "Don't go up there, Mara," she whispered. My heart skipped a beat. She hadn't spoken in years, and now she was warning me. I stood there, frozen, staring at the attic door. The air felt colder, heavier, and I felt a prickling sensation on the back of my neck. As if, just like the rest of the house, the attic was alive, watching, waiting. That night, I couldn't shake the feeling that the house was suffocating me. I had always been a logical person, dismissing anything I couldn't explain as coincidence or imagination. But Evelyn's words stuck with me. "Don't go up there, Mara." Why had she said that? She barely spoke, and when she did, it was usually unintelligible, like a broken record of long-forgotten phrases. Yet tonight, her warning seemed so clear, so purposeful. I spent the evening pacing around the house, trying to focus on something. Anything that could distract me from the creeping fear in the corners of my mind. But as midnight approached, the atmosphere only grew more oppressive. Every creak of the floorboards, every faint whisper in the air made my nerves twitch. I found myself constantly glancing toward the attic door, which now seemed to loom larger than ever. My pulse quickened every time my eyes fell on it. What was in there? What had Evelyn meant? I decided to investigate. Despite my fear, something in me, something primal perhaps, pushed me forward. I grabbed a flashlight from the kitchen drawer and made my way to the attic stairs. The heavy wooden door loomed in front of me, as if it was daring me to open it. I took a deep breath, but the sound of my own heartbeat drowned out the silence of the house. The air felt thick with anticipation, as though the house itself was holding its breath. When I opened the door, the smell hit me first. A musty, stale odor that felt like it had been trapped there for decades. The stairs creaked under my weight, protesting each step. The beam of my flashlight swept across the small, cluttered space. The attic was just as I remembered it. Dim, filled with boxes and old furniture, a place of forgotten relics. But something was different. The air felt colder here, and as my light flickered over the room, I could have sworn I saw something move. Just a shadow, slipping out of sight behind a stack of old newspapers. I froze, the hairs on the back of my neck standing up. My breath came quicker, my pulse hammering in my chest. Was I imagining things? I tried to shake off the fear, telling myself it was just the shadows playing tricks on my mind. But then I heard it. A soft scrape like nails against wood, coming from behind the farthest wall. Without thinking, I moved toward the sound. The closer I got, the stronger the scent of decay grew, and my stomach churned. I reached the far wall and shined my flashlight into the corner, where an old chest sat. It was covered in dust, but there was something about it. A feeling in my gut. That told me I should not open it. I took a step back, but the scrape came again, louder this time, as if whatever was in the attic was trying to get out. That's when I saw it. A small, almost imperceptible trapdoor in the floorboards. One I had never noticed before. My hand shook as I knelt down, brushing away the dust and debris around it. It was old, the wood splintered, but there was no mistaking what it was. I had to open it. With a deep breath, I pried it open. Inside, there was a small nest-like space. Dirty blankets, food wrappers, and something else. A Polaroid picture. I picked it up, my fingers trembling as I stared at the photo. It was a picture of me. Taken while I was asleep, the image so clear that it made my skin crawl. I couldn't breathe. My mind raced, panic settling in my chest like a stone. Someone had been in my house, watching me, and they had been here for a long time. I backed away from the trapdoor, the Polaroid still clutched in my hand, my heart pounding like a drumbeat in my ears. How had I never noticed this before? Why hadn't I been more careful? My mind raced, my thoughts colliding in a frenzied whirl of confusion and terror. This photo. This was proof that someone had been here, someone who had been watching me. But who? And for how long? I glanced over at Evelyn, who sat in her chair in the corner of the room, her eyes dull and unblinking. I knew it was irrational, but a sudden wave of dread washed over me, and I couldn't help but feel that she knew something. That she had been complicit in whatever had been happening here. I shook my head, trying to push the thought away. My grandmother had been paralyzed for years. She couldn't have done anything. But the thought lingered, gnawing at the back of my mind like a hungry animal. I sat back against the wall, the weight of everything sinking in. I couldn't stay here alone any longer. I had to get out. I couldn't be in this house, not with that thing lurking in the attic. But when I stood up, I felt the air shift. A sudden chill swept through the room, and for the briefest moment, I thought I saw something move out of the corner of my eye. I spun around, my pulse quickening, but there was nothing there. Just Evelyn, her vacant stare fixed on nothing in particular. I felt a knot tighten in my stomach as I turned back toward the trapdoor. I had to know what was going on, what I was dealing with. It wasn't safe to leave, not with something inside the house. I grabbed my laptop, setting it up in the living room with the camera facing the hallway. If I could catch something on tape, maybe I would have evidence of whatever was happening. Maybe I could prove to myself that I wasn't losing my mind. I was exhausted, but I knew I had to stay up. I had to watch. As the hours passed, the house settled into an eerie silence. The shadows in the corners of the room seemed to deepen, and the oppressive feeling in the air grew heavier. The clock on the wall ticked louder than ever. 3:13 a.m. I couldn't tell if it was the time that made my blood run cold or something else, but I knew that something was about to happen. I looked at the screen, my eyes never leaving the video feed. The living room was empty. Nothing but the dim light from the street lamp outside spilling through the window. The minutes crawled by, and then, as the clock struck 3:13, I saw it. A shadow, a dark, contorted figure, crawling from behind Evelyn's wheelchair. Its movements were jerky, unnatural. It crept forward, closer to where I was lying in bed, its black form blending with the darkness. I froze, my breath catching in my throat. It stood over me, its twisted figure looming, and then, in the silence of the night, it whispered. The words were garbled, foreign, and I couldn't understand them. It leaned closer, its face just inches from mine, its eyes hollow and dark, and as it turned its head toward the camera, it grinned. I jolted awake, the video feed still playing on my laptop, but the room around me felt suffocating. My eyes darted to the screen, but all I could see were the remnants of the shadow, lingering in the corner of the frame, as if it had never left. I took in a shaky breath, my hands trembling as I fumbled with the keyboard, pausing the video. I stared at the paused image. The grin on the thing's face was so wide, so unnatural, that I felt my stomach churn. This wasn't some trick of the light. This wasn't just a bad dream. It was real. That thing was here, and it had been waiting for me. I turned slowly to look at Evelyn, who sat silently in her chair, her hands folded neatly in her lap. She had been like that all day. The sudden whisper from her, "He's here," now took on a whole new meaning. I had thought it was just a coincidence, but now I knew. It wasn't just the house that was haunted. It was her. The demon had been inside her, all this time, just waiting for someone vulnerable enough to take its place. My throat tightened as I realized the truth. It had never left. The exorcism hadn't failed. It had simply hidden. Evelyn had been its host, its vessel, and now it was transferring to me. I backed away from her, my legs shaky, my chest tight with panic. This wasn't happening. It couldn't be. But every instinct screamed at me to run, to get away from her, from this house, from whatever was lurking inside. The doors slammed shut with a deafening bang, trapping me inside. I could hear the faint sound of breathing again, the same deep noise that had come from the darkened living room earlier. It was coming from behind me, from Evelyn. I spun around, my heart pounding in my chest, and that's when I saw it. Her body jerked violently, her back arching as if some unseen force was controlling her. Her eyes were wide, unblinking, and her mouth opened in a silent scream. The room grew colder, and I could feel the air thickening around me, as though the very walls were closing in. I was paralyzed by fear, but I couldn't just stand there. I couldn't let it take me. I turned, frantic, looking for anything that could help. My eyes landed on the laptop. The exorcism prayer. I had found it online, desperate, searching for answers. Without thinking, I grabbed it, reciting the words in a voice that shook with fear. "Leave me. Leave this house," I whispered, but it wasn't enough. The demon wouldn't let me go that easily. The demon's presence swelled around me, its weight pressing in, suffocating me. My breath came in ragged gasps as I continued the exorcism prayer, though the words seemed to have no effect. The air was thick with malevolence, and I could feel the demon's eyes upon me, watching, waiting for me to break. "Stay." A voice rasped, deep and hoarse, the sound almost as if it was coming from inside my own head. "I've waited so long for you." I snapped my head toward Evelyn. Her body convulsed violently, her hands clutching at the arms of the wheelchair as if trying to escape. Her mouth opened wide, her lips stretched in an unnatural grin, and her eyes, those empty, soulless eyes, stared right through me. I could see the demon's influence, its grip tightening around her. I was trapped. Panic surged through me as I realized I had no way out. The doors were locked, the windows sealed shut. I could feel the heat building in the room, but it wasn't from the fire I'd wanted to set. It was the demon, its fury palpable in every inch of space around me. I glanced at the corner of the room where the shadows had gathered, watching me, mocking me. And in that moment, a thought crossed my mind. I couldn't fight this with prayers. I couldn't fight it with words. But I could force it to show itself. I could force it into a physical form. I grabbed the matchbox from the counter, my hand shaking as I struck a match and lit the first one. The flames were small at first, but as they flickered, they grew larger, devouring everything they touched. The heat was unbearable, but I didn't care. I needed this. I needed the demon to come out of hiding. The flames engulfed the room, and Evelyn, no, the thing controlling her, screamed. The room seemed to twist and warp as the fire consumed everything in its path. The demon's form began to manifest, but it was no longer hidden in shadows. It was here in front of me. A grotesque skeletal figure, its eyes hollow and sunken, its body twisted and wrong in every way. It shrieked in agony as the flames wrapped around it, forcing it to reveal itself. And in that moment, I saw it. The demon wasn't just after me. It had always been after me. I was its final prey. With a final, desperate cry, the demon collapsed to the ground, its body writhing in agony as the fire continued to consume it. And then, silence. I stumbled backward, my breath ragged and shallow as I looked around the room. The fire was out of control, but it was almost over. I knew I had to get out. I couldn't stay here. I grabbed Evelyn's wheelchair, pushing it out of the room as fast as I could. The door opened easily now, the house giving way as if it knew I had won. I didn't look back. I couldn't. We made it outside, but as I looked up at the burning house, I felt a strange sense of emptiness wash over me. Evelyn's labored breaths came in shallow gasps beside me. Her grip had loosened, and I knew what that meant. Her final breath came in a soft sigh, and then she was gone. The fire raged behind me as I looked up at the distant sky, the stars seeming brighter than ever. Live in the safest neighborhood. I've lived here all my life without feeling unsafe. Neighborhoods like mine, which are impoverished and predominantly minority, are often labeled as dangerous, but they foster a strong sense of community among residents. One night, I was walking home after leaving my apartment to buy something at a nearby store. I live in a city that never sleeps, and it was only around 10 or 11 p.m., so it was just a regular early night of me going to the deli to get snacks. There was nothing eerie or weird or dangerous about it. As I entered my apartment building, a man hurried to catch the door before it closed behind me. It's common for people, including myself, to forget their keys or need to use the intercom to enter. So Elle held the door for him despite not recognizing him and sensing he was intoxicated. My building has two sides, and I assumed he lived on the other side since he wasn't a familiar face. Like I said, I've lived here all my life and know most of my neighbors. As I walked into the lobby, there was another boy waiting for the elevator. Thinking back, I don't believe I recognized him either. When the elevator arrived, the boy and I walked in, and at the last minute, the man grabbed the door to join us as it was closing. It was then I noticed the man had been lingering off to the side of the lobby, waiting for the elevator too. I began feeling uneasy. Because the man had entered at the last moment, he was able to see the elevator floor button I pressed. His finger hovered over the button of the floor I had just pressed, as if he was also going to press that one until he noticed it was already pressed. I immediately felt my stomach drop as I definitely knew he was not someone who lived on my floor. Thankfully, the other boy in the elevator was going to a floor higher than mine. When we reached my floor, the man exited the elevator and held the door open, expecting me to exit after him. I hesitated, silently staring at him without moving. Something inside me urged me to stay in the elevator. Once he realized I wasn't getting out, he let the door shut, and I immediately heard his footsteps going straight down the stairs to exit the building. I stared at the boy wondering if I should say something, worried he would think I was weird for just staying on the elevator, even though we passed my floor. I didn't say anything. We reached his floor, and he silently got off, and I took the elevator back down to my floor. I went in my apartment and locked all my doors. What scares me the most about this is that my parents were out of the country. so if that creepy man would have forced his way into my apartment, I would have been alone. I don't know if he was really after me or if I made the whole thing up in my head, but I have never had a feeling of intuition or uneasiness like that before. Looking back, I wonder if that boy was a guardian angel. I used to live in a small town where the roads were pretty simple. Now I've been living in Texas for a couple years in Houston, Texas. There are many different roads and the whole grid is a lot to get used to. Most things are 20, 30 or more minute drives away instead of 5-10 minute drives. Well, a lot of the driving I've been doing on the weekends is about 20 plus minutes away. My friend isn't as far, she only lives 15 minutes away. Enough of the Texas travel time math lol. 2 nights ago, I was on my way to a bar with my best friend Danica, not how I think you would normally pronounce it. We were going to a bar that was about an hour away. I can't remember where for the life of me what this back road was called. My friend was giving the directions, but it was somewhere off or near Katy. There is a lot of construction out on this road, so there were a few detours that pushed us out onto this little road. It was a single-lane road with an overhead caution light instead of a full-on traffic light. It was so if traffic was coming both ways, one had to stop and let the other go first. We came up to this stop, and we weren't going too fast over the speed limit, which I think was 45 here. I ended up having to slam on my brakes as an all-black SUV was standing still with the brake lights on, as if they were waiting for a car to pass from the other direction. But when I looked over, the other side was pitch black with no cars coming through or waiting. We both took a double look to see if they had their emergency lights on, and we had mistaken it for brake lights. That wasn't the case. It was pretty dark, and I looked to see if I could move around them. It seemed promising, and I decided I would try. Maybe they're drunk and just half passed out at the wheel. At the suggestion, my friend asks, "Should we check and see if they're okay?" I immediately cringed at her words. I am all for helping others and being a good person. But that is the one thing my dad drilled into my head. 1. No hitchhikers. 2. If it seems weird but you want help, get the street or road name and call 911 and tell them about it. 3. Don't try to play hero and help them by yourself, especially at night. Maybe that seems like the coward way, but why not go a route where everyone can be safe? Back to what happened, I started to pull around. We had about a car's length between us, and I was now diagonal in the road, aiming to straighten out in the other lane to leave. Their car lurched forwards and was now diagonal in the road too. We froze, unsure if the asshole had to go first. We waited a moment until they shot off their car completely. At this point, the aggressive move had me panicking. Whether if it was someone with bad intentions or who genuinely needed help and were stopping at nothing to get, I was still freaked out. Go now. Danica started panicking. I could hear the fear in her voice. We argued a moment as I asked her where I was supposed to go. She yelled for me to reverse, but the road was tiny and a long way to drive in reverse before we would come out somewhere wider or more populated. It wasn't until we safed the back car door of the SUV crack open that we really started to freak out. It was dark inside their vehicle, no inside overhead lights, and the door just stayed open, no movements. I decided I'd take my chances. I slipped into reverse and kept driving, trying to stay straight until we reached the turns in the road. There were several times I swerved, and a couple times I had to realign myself to the road again. My heart rate and adrenaline spiking each time we had to slow down to stop from crashing. Danica kept telling me that no one had followed us, but we both kept dreading and expecting to see their headlights barreling towards us. Luckily, we finally came out to a fork in the road. It was still dark and a not-so-nice-looking area with a rundown gas station to our left. As we turned and started for the road heading back to her house, a group of about 6 or 7 Ducati-style bikes, not sure that's what they were, came flying past and headed down the road we had just come from. Each other, the riders had no helmets, but had bandanas over their faces. The last one to pass had a girl on the back, and as she passed she waved at us with what looked like a mini semi-automatic rifle. If you play Call of Duty, those little scorpion guns is what it reminded me of. At this point, we had no idea how to react. We were utterly confused, shocked, and terrified as what just happened or why it happened. We ended up stopping in at Denny's 2 miles from her house, too shaken to not be around a lot of people. It wasn't until that moment we ended up calling the cops to tell them what happened and about the road. We aren't sure if anything ever came from it. We keep looking for any news on arrests, but we were probably too late in reporting it. Later on, we did find out that's how some gangs initiate their new members. They probably were planning on killing us, possibly both. It's safe to say that I stay away from places like that late at night. Not so much an encounter, but a weird and creepy experience I had today. I got home an hour ago to find my door unlocked. What I found when I walked in has me scared shitless and incredibly confused. First thing I noticed when I walked in was that my couch was moved. Normally sitting in the living room, the couch has replaced my dining table in the kitchen. My table is where my couch was. The whole living room was organized. Blankets folded, pillows fluffed. Some of my shoes I left in the living room were moved to a corner or into my room. My laptop was also moved into my bedroom from my living room. It gets weirder. I had a case of soda I had left on the counter, and now all of the cans are in my fridge and the box was recycled. I had left dirty dishes in the sink and came to find my sink empty and my dishwasher full. Trash around my kitchen and living room was thrown away too. I went to look at the other rooms. My roommate's bed was made and a little disco light was on and spinning in the middle of his room. His floor was completely clear of clothes and trash. My bed had been made as well. Clothes, shoes, and a backpack that had been on my floor were shoved into the closet. A picture was taken off my wall and placed on my pillow. Some crackers I had been eating were arranged in a heart on my desk. Nothing was missing. My gaming systems, TVs, computers, music equipment, even my cash was untouched. I think someone is playing a prank on me, but all my friends have denied it. I know this may sound stupid, but I am honestly so freaked out right now. Someone entered my house and moved all my stuff around. I don't even know what to do now. Edits for clarity. I talk to anyone it could think who knows where I live and could have done this. Family, friends, old roommates, everyone has denied it. Additionally, everyone I talked to seemed very confused and concerned for my safety. Either I'm overlooking someone is lying, or it was a stranger. My roommate left before me for work yesterday and was at work until 10:30 p.m. I left for work at 5 p.m. and came home at 9 p.m. to see everything changed. After my roommate got home, we looked around the house more to make super sure nothing was missing and see if we could find any clues. The only thing I can find that is gone is my deodorant. We did find some more weird stuff, though that makes it feel more like a prank. A PS4 controller was placed on the top shelf of a kitchen cabinet where we keep chips. Shaving cream from our bathroom was placed on top of a record player in the spare room. Toothpaste was moved from the bathroom counter and tucked away behind some stuff under the sink. We also found a pair of sunglasses neither of us have seen before. Edit part 2. Holy shit. 2 people in the comments mentioned that this reminded them of Charles Manson's Creepy Crawlies. I was confused, so I did some research, and that sounds exactly like what happened to me. Literally, one article mentioned instances of couches being switched with dining room tables. This definitely gave me chills, but myself and a lot of my friends are into stuff like serial killers and crime docs. I wouldn't be surprised if one of my friends knew this fact about Manson and is trying to mess with me. I have been reading the comments and honestly taking a lot of them into consideration. I checked briefly for listening devices or cameras, but didn't find anything suspicious in light fixtures or cabinets. I didn't check super well though, because I'm also in the middle of finals trying to write a paper, but I cannot focus on anything. I've posted more about the experience on my other socials. No one has admitted to anything. Lots of my friends are throwing around guesses as to who did it, but nothing. I honestly can't tell if anyone is lying. Everyone seems genuinely as confused and or concerned as me. But as some people have mentioned, it's definitely possible that someone was trying to mess with me thinking it was funny and is now ashamed and embarrassed based on my serious reaction. I personally think I have every right to be really freaked out by this. Anyway, I'll continue to post anything else I find out. I'm moving out of my cabin and I need a place to stay. So, I need a place to stay indefinitely until I can find somewhere more permanent. No shelter in my state will take me because I technically already have a place to live. I also have a cat, and no shelter in my state takes pets. I'm not leaving my cat. A year ago, I got a job that allows me to work completely from home. Immediately, I asked my aunt if she would be okay with me moving into her vacation cabin. It's empty most of the year anyway, and I would be able to look after it. She was fine with it. I was fine with it. I don't have a boyfriend, and all my friends are internet friends through Discord. I like being alone, and it doesn't bother me. There was a time where I decided I was going to go out more and start doing stuff, but that year pandemic happened. I don't need to elaborate. The cabin isn't even that remote. I had one neighbor who lived in the house next door. I can get groceries delivered. Whenever I called the useless local police, it only took them 20 minutes to get here. I'm not that far from town. If I had a car, I would be gone by now and living out of it. My aunt offered to buy me a car, and I stupidly didn't take it because I didn't have my license at the time. I still don't. I never needed one. My aunt always drove me to work, and other than that, I never went outside. The weird stuff started happening after a week, and it started with bouts of amnesia. The episodes began periodically, but now every night, I wake up around 4 a.m., and I have forgotten everything except who I am. The cabin has 3 bedrooms, and I sleep in the smallest one. I keep the door open, and there is no shade on the window, but it doesn't help. The woods are completely dark, and there are no street lights at all. Once I turn off the lights for the night, it is completely pitch black. The first night I woke up like this, I found myself in a completely pitch black void, no sensory input except the vague feeling of sheets under me. I didn't remember where I was, or when it was, or if I was even on Earth. Somehow, every time this happens, I always get the vague sense that there is a lamp somewhere in this dark space, and I find it. Once I switch it on, the room comes back, and I remember I moved into a cabin by myself. I tried leaving the lights on or using the nightlight my aunt still had from when I was a child, but then I couldn't sleep at all. The first night it happened, I didn't go back to sleep right away. I went out into the living room, which is the same room as the kitchen. My cats, Jinx and Minx, were asleep on the back of the plaid yellow couch. Minx was white and fluffy, and Jinx is a short-haired black cat. They woke up when I came out of my bedroom. I'm going to explain the layout of this cabin. The front door leads into the kitchen. The kitchen is half of the big room, on the other half is the living room. What separates them is a bar seating area and a door to the backyard. The door to the backyard is half glass window, and that's where I first saw him. The bathroom and bedrooms are directly off the living room, except for the attic bedroom, whose stairs are in the kitchen. That night I went to sleep on the couch and had my first nightmare in the cabin. This is where it gets weirder. Whenever I slept in the living room, I would have dreams about this monster I could not see. However, the monster was immortal and invincible, and if it saw me, I was instantly dead. This is always the nightmare I have in the living room. When I tried sleeping in the bigger bedroom, I always have a nightmare about mutant animals living in the ground. They are starving and will hunt humans. When I sleep in the attic bedroom, I have the nightmare where I am walking around a random house, and I make my way up into the attic, where there is always a giant horror. Every time I wake up from these dreams, my heart is beating so fast and hard that I feel like I'm on fire. The only place I don't have these dreams is the small bedroom, so I have settled for the bouts of amnesia, and they aren't as painful as the dreams. I used to let my cats outside into the backyard every day. They'd almost always come back by nighttime, but if they didn't, I would go out looking for them. They aren't allowed outside anymore. I'm going to explain why. Months ago, I was on my lunch break and wanted to eat in the backyard in the small clearing. I stopped myself when I saw a giant dog through the back door. I'm not a dog person, I don't know the breeds, but he was the same breed as Scooby-Doo, but he wasn't spotted, he was completely black. Standing on all 4 legs, his head would have reached my shoulder. I am 5'3". He was chasing around a fluffy brown dog that could fit in a purse. The purse dog had a collar and was running for his life in the clearing. The black dog was viciously chasing him, but it was obvious he wasn't putting all his strength into it, almost as if he enjoyed seeing the small dog panic and run. Neither of them saw me. I felt Jinx rub against my leg, eager to go out. I realized did not see Minx. Minx was outside with this dog. I panicked. I couldn't keep Jinx from trying to get out, so I locked him in the bathroom, just temporarily. I opened the back door, and the cries of the little dog became louder. There was no other sound. I began calling for Minx, and the relief when she tiptoe ran along the side of the house to sneak inside was like a gust of fresh air. I closed the door, locked it, and held her for a moment. She slammed her head into my shaking hand affectionately. She left to go find her food bowl, and I stood up to make sure the door was closed, and I saw him again. The black dog stood facing the door, looking at me with its gray eyes. It was so still, just staring at me. I thought he didn't see me sneak Minx in, but he did, and he wanted me to know that he knew. I fell onto the floor again, under the window so that I'd be out of his sight. No window in this house has a curtain, but I didn't want him to see me. I crawled to the kitchen to make sure the front door was locked and shut. It was, and the front door also has a window. Outside I would see on my deck the small body of the brown purse dog. No blood, no injuries, just a body. I called the nearest animal control and told them about the dog. What address is this dog at? I told them my address. I'm not stupid enough to put that information on Reddit. Well, we are redacted country animal control. We don't service that area. Your only option based on your location is to call the police. The police were at my cabin in 20 minutes and asked about the dog. My aunt has cameras outside the house. I can show you exactly what it looks like. I pulled up the footage on my laptop as the two officers stood in the kitchen. First, I pulled up the footage of the backyard, where the black dog can be seen chasing the purse dog. However, the black dog remained in the backyard until the police arrived. Then, we looked at the footage to see how the brown dog ended up at the front of the house. Looks like that's another dog, the officer sighed. In the footage, an identical black dog laid out the body of the purse dog in front of my door. Behind him, in the trees, a third black dog waits for him to finish. They both run off. A third. The female officer rapidly took notes on her small notepad. I noticed she had a blank, almost bored expression. You're just about the 100th person who's come calling us about these dogs, the older, white-haired male officer said. Pets are going missing, pets are being found dead, and we have the disappearance of a child that we're dealing with now also. Know that you are being taken seriously, however. Whenever we do manage to catch these dogs, more do show up. We do have an investigation running, and your report will be part of that. Call us if you see anything else, the female officer said. As of now, I wouldn't let eye of your pets outside for the time being. They left. I locked the door. For the first time, I switched on the deadbolt. I tried to forget about it. Every other night, my internet friends from one Discord server play video games. I usually join them. Between a round, my best friend, Mary, reached out to me. You okay? She DM'd me. Why? You seem off, she explained. I figured it was work stress, maybe. A stray dog almost killed my cat today, I explained. And when I called the police, they told me there are possibly hundreds in the woods, and they even got to a child. Holy shit, she said. Move. I can't, I said. And I don't really want to. Even if I did, my aunt is in France for the next 4 months, and I really have nowhere else to go besides her house. If I didn't live with my parents, I would let you stay with me, Mary said. I know, I responded. If I didn't live in a haunted cabin surrounded by wild dogs, I'd let you stay with me. Still sounds nicer than living with my parents at 26, she responded. A new round is starting. We ended up playing until 1 a.m., and then switching to another game until 3 a.m. Afterwards, I checked the local news. A woman went missing. The child was still not found. A couple of black dogs were shot. That night I went to bed in my small bedroom. My cats joined me on the bed. They were out of energy and affection after begging to go outside all day. I had to set up a litter box again, and they weren't happy about sharing it. But that night they calmed down and were hogging the top of my bed, but I still managed to find space to squeeze in. That night I dreamt of a bleak tan cafe. There were large windows facing empty streets. There was no smell of coffee, no barista, and no customers. I was sitting at a table across from my friend, Mary. We had never met in person, but we video call at least once a week and call almost every day. I know what she looks like. Mid-size, comfy gray clothing, long black waves brushing against her arms. She was paler in my dream. "You know you're dreaming, right?" she asked me. "Well," I said, "now I do." "Good," she said. "Listen, those dogs aren't dogs. The monster you dream of, but you can't see, he's real. You can't let Jinx and Minx out, and you can't go outside. There's no way to fight it or to outrun it, and there's no way to kill them. They just come back." "Okay," I said. "And no matter what happens today," Mary said, "do not go outside by yourself." "Don't I need to leave?" I asked. "You should," she snapped. "But not by yourself. It won't go after you in front of an audience, so getting a police officer escort or even an Uber driver is how you stay safe. If you try and go out alone, you're dead." "Being dead doesn't sound so bad anymore," I joked. "You don't want this death." Emotion fell from her face, and she spoke sternly. "How do you know all this?" I asked her. "I'm Dream Mary, not real Mary," she said. "I know things. Now you need to wake up." "I don't think I want to," I said. "No, girl," she snapped again. "You have to wake up before you forget how." The dream was gone. I woke up in the void. I turned on the lamp. I had toast for breakfast that day because I was out of eggs, milk, and most other things. Groceries were getting delivered at noon, so it wasn't that big of a deal. The cats were out of wet food and getting impatient. I started my workday, and the delivery came on my lunch break. I opened the door just enough for me to squeeze through and drag in the bags. I was pulling in the last bag. That's when Minx leapt out. My heart must have stopped. I was screaming, "No, Minx, come back. Minx, please come back." He was sitting on the ledge of the deck. I stood up, stepped out, bracing to grab him. In a moment, he saw something in the woods that scared him and ran to the back of the house. I looked at what had startled him and saw the dog glaring at me. I slammed the door and was on my knees. I was suffocating while I hyperventilated. I gripped my legs and slowly realized if Minx was at the back of the house, I could call her in from there. I ran to the back door, threw it open, no shoes, stepped out, and my foot hit something. It was Minx's body. Picked her up and turned the knob on the back door. It was locked. It automatically locked. Barefoot, outside in the grass, with my cat hanging limply from my arms. I've never run so fast in my life. I left the backyard, went past the side of the house. I made it to the front door, locked, bolted. Of course it was. I began trying every single window, until I got to the small bedroom window. It was unlocked. I opened it and made it to safety, slamming the window shut behind me. I carried Minx into the living room. I didn't want her to be dead, so I didn't believe that she was. I did the checks. She wasn't breathing, she wasn't moving, and Jinx wouldn't stop crying. I called out of work for the rest of the day. I was sobbing in a blanket, strewn out on the couch. I didn't move for hours. Eventually, when I ran out of tears, I laid out a white towel on the coffee table. I lit a few candles and lined the towel with flower clippings from my vase and scattered cat treats out. Minx was stiff by now, and I lay her on the towel as some sort of wake. New tears came, and I don't know really what I was thinking. I was just trying to cope with my grief. I fell asleep late afternoon and dreamt of him again. I was hiding in a closet and couldn't breathe, or else he would hear me. I woke up to the sound of Jinx eating the crunchy cat treats that had been laid out on the funeral pyre. Eventually, he fell asleep next to Minx's body. I paced the house, and through the glass window, I saw the dog again. Rage filled up my chest. Why did you let me live? I called the police again. In 20 minutes, new officers were in my front yard, hearing me yell and scream about how they aren't doing anything about the dogs, and how my cat wouldn't have died if the dogs had actually been dealt with. I was so loud. My one elderly neighbor came outside to spectate. "Ma'am," the officer said, "I'm sorry about your cat. We're doing everything we can with the resources we have. We can do a sweep of your property, but we probably won't find any dogs." "Don't you have any search equipment?" I stammered. "Like search dogs." "Our search dogs lead us away from the loose dogs," the officer explained. "Now, we have a shoot-on-sight order for these animals, and if we find a dog on your property, we won't let him get away. However, because of our investigation, that's all we can do at the moment. I am sorry about your cat." The officers left after doing a sweep of the yard. I went back into my house. A moment later, I heard a knock. I saw my elderly neighbor's face through the glass. His leathery wrinkles formed a serious expression, and his bushy eyebrows loomed over his sad eyes. He had a beard, a flannel, and an American flag hat. I thought twice about opening the door. Before letting him in, I locked Jinx in the bathroom, just temporarily. He stepped inside, and I shut the door. "The police know what's going on," he explained. "I had 2 huskies and a retriever, all big girls. A few weeks ago gone. I called them. They didn't even search my property." He paused for a moment. Jinx was crying to be let out of the bathroom. "They got your cat." Tears welled up. "Yeah." "Well, don't bother calling the police," he said. "Call me. I have guns. We will take care of them ourselves." "There are so many," I said, "and I don't think it's safe." "There aren't that many," he stammered. "The police know exactly how many there are. They're letting them live. Why? Who knows?" What followed was a mumbling rant about how all the US presidents are related if you go back far enough on the family tree, and if the country leaders could be chosen and inbred, then the police officers probably were too. "You can't trust these people," he insisted. At this point, I just wanted this man out of my house, but I took down his phone number. I would call him the next time I saw a black dog. I asked my elderly neighbor to accompany me in burying Minx. I buried her under a rose bush in the front yard. I told my work I would need the next few days to grieve. I explained my pet had died. They weren't understanding. That night, I video called with Mary. Majority of it was my tear-filled ramblings about Minx. The rest of it was general conversation. "Did you have any dreams last night?" I asked at the end of a crying fit. "I don't think so." Her eyes looked off camera. She was doodling. "Wait, no, I did. You were in it." "What was the dream?" I asked. "We were having brunch in a cafe," she explained. "It was a good dream." I dragged my spare comforter to the bathroom. Jinx and I slept in the bathtub that night. I desperately hoped I wouldn't have a nightmare. The idea of falling asleep was startling enough to keep me awake. Outside, there was this monster ready to end my life. I don't know what changed. When I first got to this cabin, I'd go outside all the time. I'd sleep outside on the hammock and wake up in the sun with Minx on my chest. I'd go out on night walks all the time. I have no idea what happened to make my sanctuary a nightmare. I don't know what I did to anger him, if anything at all. I fell asleep and had another nightmare. I was in an elevator going up. The elevator door was gone, so I could see each floor as I passed or approached it. I was listening to Mary through a walkie-talkie. She was giving me instructions. I looked up into the oncoming floor and saw a black dog, huge teeth, drooling. The elevator wouldn't stop, and I was getting closer, panicking. I pressed every elevator button that might stop the ascent. It was too late. I woke up. The next day, I took a steak from my last grocery order out of the freezer. It was raw. I let it thaw for a few hours, then I tossed it into the front yard. I waited. Jinx was crying from the bathroom. One of the black dogs came out, pretending not to see me in the window. As he was chewing the raw meat, a bit irritated at the partial frozenness of it, I texted my elderly neighbor. "There's one in my front yard now," I sent the message. "Now there are 2. He sent me a thumbs-up emoji and then said, "I'm coming." I watched as he came out, got their attention, and quickly shot both of them. The gun was so loud that Jinx went silent. I saw the 2 black dogs fall limp on the grass. I saw my neighbor from his porch. He put out his cigarette, waved at me, and went back inside. "Can't stay outside for too long," he texted me. Later that day, I saw another dog in my backyard. He was right at the back door, looking inside. I texted my neighbor. "There's another one in my backyard." No response. I waited an hour. I texted him again, asking if he was okay. Then I called him. No answer. I called the police that night to do a wellness check. His front door was wide open, but he was gone. It's been weeks, and he is still a missing person. That day, all my hope died. I realized that he could get into our homes. I hit my breaking point a few days ago and packed a single bag, put Jinx in a carrier, and called an Uber. The Uber canceled. I called about 10 more times. No driver would come to my area. I just wanted someone to pick me up and drive me to town so I could sleep in an alley or in a dumpster. I just need to get out of this cabin. I called the police station again, sobbing. They said they could get a car out here to escort me to a new place because of the safety concern, but I would need a new place to go. My aunt is in Europe for another month, but I can't do it anymore. My aunt never keeps a spare key outside, so my plan is to have the police drive me to her house, break a window when they leave, and move in. I don't know how angry my aunt would be, but I've lived in that house all my life up until now, and I would pay to fix the window. If anyone has any better option, please let me know. I've called every shelter in the state with no luck. I'm being escorted out tomorrow, but I don't even know if he will let me go. I told Mary that if I ghost her, she should assume I was dead. I just need to get from my house to the cop car and out of these woods. That's it. I don't know if I will make it. Edit and update. I made it to my aunt's house with Jinx, and I've been staying here for a week. I managed to go that entire week without nightmares, and I was finally beginning to feel okay again. I didn't write an update because honestly, I just wanted to erase the whole situation from my memory. That didn't last long. Last night I had a dream that the black dog was tearing me to shreds. He started with my face. I felt every bit of pain. This morning I woke up and found large dog prints in the mud outside. I'm not letting Jinx out anymore. I don't know what to do. So I live in a hunting cabin. Going to have to lay down some context before I begin. I live in a fairly small town in Michigan mid-lower peninsula. Generally speaking, the only things to do around here are drink, hunt, and cook meth. My mother broke up with her abusive boyfriend, so we had to find a new house pretty quick. Rent is pretty steep around here, and finding a place with 4 bedrooms, and that allows pets, is pretty hard to do. My mom's boss thankfully had a hunting cabin that he agreed to rent out to us on the cheap. If any of you have been in a hunting cabin, you'll know that what I was expecting was a pretty crappy place in the middle of the woods. Boy, was I wrong. His cabin was a 4-bedroom, 3-bathroom palace compared to where we were living before. Fully furnished basement to boot. The only bad news was no internet. I am on dial-up right now, and it freaking blows. This house is situated at the top of a hill, but it's not too steep. The front yard has a clearing in the front, and a giant fenced-in area probably around 2 acres that was used for horses until the doctor's kids no longer wanted them. It's now overgrown with thick ferns and such. Beyond the pen is the tree line in front. The driveway continues on in that direction for about a half a mile until it reaches the road. To the left and right of the house is forest, and directly behind the house, 6 feet at most, is a dry riverbed and forest. Half the house is on these sort of stilts because of the hill going down into the riverbed. There's a wrap-around deck above. It has a strange open feeling, even though you're technically in the woods. Being slightly up above the trees from that far away lended to this as well. Now because of the hill, half of the basement was underground and half was not. There's a door that leads directly outside from the basement and a path to the garage. Half of the basement has no windows because, that part was underground, and the half closest to the riverbed does, as it was, not underground. My room is on the side with windows. Gotta say, as a big nature lover, the view was spectacular. I could oftentimes see deer on the other side of the dip in the land, and one night I was woken up by a pack of coyotes howling just a few feet from me, the glass and blinds being the only thing between us. Pretty terrifying to be woken up by, but after a few seconds I was able to enjoy the experience. My story begins a week ago. I wake up to a thud. Living in a house with 4 other people, these things can happen, so I didn't think anything of it. I just roll over and try to get back to sleep. A few minutes later I hear another thud, this one coming from above me. Above me is the kitchen, as well as the wrap-around deck. Someone must have needed a drink in the night, no biggie. Third thud comes from outside. I sit up in bed and try and see out the window through the blinds, but nothing seems out of the ordinary. Maybe 30 seconds goes by, and as I'm about to get back into bed, this thing lands in front of me. It was hard to see with only the moonlight, but I can tell you it was big and furry. It looked like a bear on its hind legs, but it was facing away from me. It walked away down into the riverbed and hunched over, disappearing from my sight. I can only see the top 2/3 or so of the riverbed. Before I can make up my mind whether I should scream or run, I see it. I see this thing's eyes. 2 big silver eyes reflecting moonlight back at me. It carried a deer in its paws and dropped it down once it reached the top of the riverbed. This thing was maybe 4 feet from me. I was holding my breath, trying not to move an inch. It hunched over the deer and began to peck at it with its beak, ripping off bits of meat. 10-20 minutes must have gone by, just me watching this thing eat. As I'm considering whether or not I'll be standing here all night, my phone goes off. Text message. Wonderful. Half the time I can't even get reception in my room, but it decides to work now. Its head snaps up, and it lets out this shriek. It was both low-pitched and high-pitched at the same time, like 2 people were yelling in unison. Thankfully, the thing picked up what was left of its meal and ran off into the woods. I could hear doors slamming and people shouting above me. Now, to be honest, I didn't think anyone would believe me. I just told them it was coyotes again, and eventually everyone went back to sleep. I slept on the couch that night, and the next 3 nights as well. By the 4th night, my mother was acting concerned about me, and I didn't want to make her worry, so I decided to sleep in my room that night. Who knows, maybe I was still half asleep when all that happened, and it was just a bear or something. This is what I told myself to try and get to sleep. 2 nights go by with no incident. Last night, however, I was not so lucky. No noises or anything, but I could just not shake the feeling that I was being watched. Like a chill up my spine, and I was fidgety. I looked towards my window to see 2 glowing eyes staring back at me. After what felt like an eternity, it made this sort of low rumbling chirp noise, turned around and ran off into the woods. Needless to say, I slept on the couch. This morning I went out back to see if I could find any tracks or anything, and all I found was a haunch of meat near my window, which I bagged up and took to our dumpster. Now I'm not sure if this thing was trying to be friendly or what, but I do know there's no way I'm going to find out. I'm typing this from my living room right now. Thankfully, I haven't heard anything unusual tonight, and the living room has blackout curtains which are a godsend. I just hope it doesn't know how to work doors. They're all locked right now, but they can't stay locked all the time. So my father used to own a cabin. In fact, he used to own a lot of different properties, which I suppose is just a roundabout way of saying that we grew up with money. Where things get a bit complicated is how he actually made that money. The line that he constantly fed us was that he was an accountant running his own firm in an office in the city. Long hours, lots of business trips. We never saw him much. And whenever we did, he always seemed tired, his eyes perpetually bloodshot, as if he were always trying to force them to stay open. He was sent off to prison right after I'd finished my first year of college. The sentence: 15 years for washing hundreds of millions of dollars for numerous cartels. 2 weeks after he'd been booked, my mother committed act of unaliving herself. As it turns out, she'd been helping him out through the entire thing and was facing some time herself. I guess she didn't want to deal with all that and took the drastic way out. A few months later, The government had seized pretty much all his property. All of it, except for that cabin in the woods. It took a long time for me to feel normal again. But eventually I managed it. Went back to school and graduated with a good enough GPA, which allowed me to snag some shitty office job a few months later. But it was enough to pay the bills. Fast forward about another year, and I've basically scrubbed that entire sequence of events out of my brain. It took a little bit of therapy, a lot of psychedelics, but I finally did it, to the point where I was comfortable enough to go back to that cabin, the one place where I'd see my father for more than a few weeks at a time during our summer trips. I decided to take along 3 of my friends from uni: Jack, Pedro, Randy. We drove down there at the beginning of May. The road leading to the cabin hadn't been maintained at all, and as a result, it had become borderline undrivable. I decided to save my vehicle the stress and parked in a nearby lot, leaving us about a 1.5-mile trek through the woods, which really wasn't so bad. Our time in the cabin was pretty much spent getting drunk and stoned, and by the 3rd night we had completely run out of food. We decided to take the 30-minute walk over to the nearest rest stop, where I knew that there was a 24/7 diner. So we go there, eat our meals, and on the way back we notice a burning smell in the woods, as if there was a bonfire raging about nearby. Of course, that was a bit strange given that it was around 2 a.m. But we didn't think too much of it at the time, and we kept walking. It was only when the smell continued to grow stronger as we got closer to the cabin that we understood something was very wrong. Soon it had become suffocating, and we could see the night sky tinged with orange in the near distance. I felt my heart drop into my stomach, and immediately I was sprinting. My worst fear realized as I reached the clearing where the cabin was located. Completely up in flames, plumes of dark smoke blending in with the night. It was a mix of different emotions that hit me all at once, the combination of them creating a sense of dread so deep I hadn't thought it possible. After reeling myself in, I called 911, with the operator telling me that the fire department would be on their way, but wouldn't be able to reach us for at least 30 minutes. The 4 of us walked away from the cabin in silence, getting far enough so that the smoke was no longer scratching at our throats. Around 10 minutes later, we noticed that the orange tinge in the sky had suddenly disappeared. And I mean suddenly, like gone in a single blink. I thought I might have been hallucinating, but it was clear from their expressions that my friends were seeing something similar. Cautiously, we started making our way back towards the cabin, noticing that the smoke was no longer heavy in the air, having cleared up considerably. Once we reached the clearing, it had disappeared altogether. I looked ahead, my brain working overtime to comprehend the sight before me. The cabin was no longer on fire, burnt to a crisp, sure. But the raging, overwhelming flames that had been consuming it just minutes prior had somehow completely fizzled out. The 4 of us looked between each other, as if to confirm we were all still seeing the same thing. Using the flashlight on my phone to survey the damage, I found pretty much what I'd expected. Complete destruction. Absolutely zero hope of recovering anything. I started taking some deep breaths, trying to calm myself down when I heard Pedro yelling out from the other side. "Guys, where the F did this thing come from?" We all walked over to him. Nestled in the debris was the corpse of something. A monstrosity. It was about the size of a bear, with the sections of its body that weren't burnt showing pale, clammy skin with deep cuts etched throughout it, in what looked to be some kind of crude pattern. Its head had been smashed in, leaving nothing but an abnormally wide-bottomed jaw, which was still bearing long black teeth. It had an uncountable number of long, thick arms that it was using to hold something that resembled a human infant, one that appeared to be completely unscathed, devoid of any burn marks. The longer I stared at it, the more that I was convinced I could see it breathing. It was a bizarre enough sight to put us into a near trance. What eventually snapped us out of it was the chanting. It was barely noticeable at first, slowly escalating in pitch until it was clear that there were several human voices shouting in unison. Their tones were animalistic, their words strung together with just the bare beginnings of a rhythm. It sounded like they were speaking English, though I could hardly make out anything they were saying. The strangest part, though, was how quickly it was getting closer to us. Definitely not a walking pace. It was more like a sprint. The four of us shared a quick glance between each other, and immediately there was an understanding. We ran like bats out of hell, tripping over branches, our own feet. But eventually we reached my car, all of us scrambling to pile into it. As I was fumbling for my keys, the chanting had become deafening, to a point that hardly made sense. It sounded as if there were speakers lined up in a circle around us, all blasting that horrible noise. And the second that I had put the keys into the ignition, things went silent. I found myself holding my breath as I looked up, my eyes slowly adjusting to the darkness until what I was seeing was unmistakable. Several figures standing completely still at the edge of the woods, all human-shaped but far too large to be people. All the air being held in my lungs flooded out with one big exhale, and I slammed the vehicle into drive and took a sharp turn before speeding the hell out of there, refusing to look in the rear view until we had made it into the highway. I drove until I had reached the rest stop, which was now hosting an absurd number of police cars. I parked, got out, and approached one of the cops, asking if they were here because of the fire. The cop shook his head. "Fire? No. Has there been a fire?" I explained the situation with the cabin to him, deciding to leave out the creature and the chanting for the time being. The cop nodded slowly, his expression remaining largely the same throughout. "All right," he said. "We'll look into it, and then give you an update in the morning. For tonight, just get a hotel or something." We exchanged numbers, and I thanked him. As I began to walk away, he called out to me, "Hey, can I ask you something?" I turned back around. "Yeah," I said. "Sure. Do you happen to be my dad's named son?" For a while, I just stared at him. Eventually, I nodded. "Yeah," he said. "I thought I recognized you." "I don't understand," I told him. "I've never seen you before." The cop took a deep breath before taking a quick look around. "Come here," he said. "Come close." Tentatively, I did so. "I can't tell you everything. I don't even know everything. But I think you should have the right to know the truth about your father. All of the stuff that's happened here tonight, all of the shit that you've seen, it has something to do with him." He took another look around before continuing. "Cartels, right? Was that the story they told you? It's not so creative. But I guess it doesn't have to be creative to be believable. 'Cause the shit that he was actually mixed up in, you would not believe unless you've seen it for yourself." "What the hell are you talking about?" I asked. "Look, I have your number. I'll be in touch tomorrow morning. This is something I'm curious about as well. Maybe you can give me some answers, point me in the right directions. But not here, so get out of here before people start noticing you, and stay safe." I didn't feel like staying in a hotel that night, so I drove back into the city, dropping everybody off before arriving back at my own apartment. Of course I couldn't sleep that night, my eyes wired open into the morning as I waited for the officer to call. He still hadn't by the time that noon rolled around, and so I tried calling him instead. No answer. Eventually I did receive a call from the police, telling me that my father's cabin had burned down, and that it was due to a forest fire. I told them that wasn't possible because there had been no forest fire, and that I suspected foul play and wanted it to be investigated. "It's already been investigated," are the exact words that the officer told me. "Don't worry about it. Just get in touch with insurance. Go over your options." And before I could say anything else, he had hung up on me. It was a mixture of anger and curiosity that compelled me to drive back down there. I'm not sure what I was expecting, but it certainly wasn't for the road leading towards the rest stop to be blocked altogether. There were 2 cop cars guarding the barrier, with a single officer signaling any vehicles approaching to turn around. I pulled over to the side of the road, and after some careful deliberation, I decided to get out and approach him and ask what was going on, just to see what he might say. When I finished the question, he stared at me for a long time. Uncomfortably long. "Emergency construction," is what he eventually told me. After that encounter, I pretty much dropped trying to figure things out. Some weird things have started happening to me since. Every night, I swear I can hear a baby crying in the apartment across from mine. The apartment that I thought had been occupied by a pair of college kids who definitely do not have children. That cop that was supposed to call me finally did, a few nights ago. When I answered, I was met with dead silence on the other end. Nearly 30 seconds of it until the line clicked dead. There's an abandoned house sitting across the street from my apartment building, one that's supposedly been there for years because the development of the store meant to take its place keeps getting delayed. Somebody has started staring at me through its second floor window. Whenever I catch them doing it, they're quick to close the blinds, so I can never catch any details. But I know that the moment I turn away from it, their eyes are back on me. I can't confirm that any of these things are related, whether it has anything to do with my father. I just know that I don't want to deal with it and that I want it to end. To preface this, I, 22 female, live in Northern California and I'm new to the area. I'm staying with family in a cottage separate from the main house. It's very small, one story. To the left of the cottage is the main house. To the right, there's a big tree with an old treehouse platform. Last night, I was up way later than I should have been as usual scrolling the clock app. Shortly after 2:30 a.m., I heard weird noises coming from outside the cottage. Some of the noises sounded like the outside wall was being screwed with. This caught my attention and I was alert but not worried. I kind of ignored it and it stopped for a moment before it got weird. I've never had this problem before or heard of this outside of a scary story. There were footsteps on the roof. They started on the side where the tree overhangs the cottage. I listened intently at this point because what the F? They were not running but not eerily slow either. It dead-ass sounded like a person, bigger than a kid, was on the roof. It couldn't have been an animal of any kind. Sounds just like being below neighbors in an apartment, but with a texture of shingles instead of carpet or tile. It was a human footstep, right? I've listened to people walking my whole life. It couldn't be anything else. It walked across the cabin from the tree towards the main house above my bed, then stopped completely. After the footsteps vanished, I started hearing the weird noises outside of the walls again. Now that I'm thinking about it, I didn't hear anything jump off and hit the ground. It's fully possible someone climbed the tree to get up there, but there's not a ladder anymore and would be a task. It could have been a teenager, a robber, or a creep. I believe in the paranormal, but have experienced much weirder shit that is completely unexplainable. This could be explained, right? What does this call for? Do I tell my family and possibly notify the police? There could be an ongoing investigation with a rooftop psycho on the loose for all I know. What if it's just a ghostie hanging out? I know I sound a bit nuts, but I know what I heard and don't want to end up on the morbid podcast. I'm not terrified, but definitely concerned. What should I do? When I was 17, my brother, who was 13 at the time, and I were traveling in northern British Columbia in mid-November. This detail is important because the darkness in the mountains at that time of year is absolute. We were in the Pine Pass between Chetwynd and Prince George, British Columbia. Anyone familiar with this area knows how desolate it is. I'm talking hundreds of kilometers between gas stations and any signs of civilization. We were near the Powder King ski resort turnoff, and it was getting late. Around 10 or 10:30 p.m., I pulled into a roadside turnout because I was extremely tired. My brother was already asleep. I parked near some tourist signage, locked the doors, and reclined my seat to sleep. I was dead asleep when something suddenly snapped me awake. To this day, I'm not sure what it was that woke me. I looked around, trying to figure out what was happening, when all of a sudden, my car was surrounded by 4 or 5 men. They started yanking on the door handles, trying to get in. I don't know if they realized I was awake, but I sat up, slammed the car into drive, and peeled out of there. I'm not sure if I hit one of them, and I didn't care to check. I didn't stop until I reached my auntie's house in Prince George. It was one of the most terrifying experiences of my life. So, to the 4 or 5 men in the Pine Pass who tried to break into a car with 2 kids inside, I hope I ran over at least one of your feet. One time, I was in Canada on a snowboarding trip to Panorama with some friends. We decided to go out for a drive and smoke some weed along a stretch of road lined with trees. It was probably the middle of the night, but the moon was so bright that we could see fairly well. We hadn't seen anyone else on the road until we came around a bend. In the middle of the road was something. It looked like maybe a small log or possibly a dead animal. As we got closer, it became clear that it was a person lying on their back in the middle of a snowy, narrow road in the middle of the woods. Mind you, this was the first sign of human life we had seen in the last hour of driving around. There was no vehicle, no four-wheeler, nothing, just the person. Everyone in the pickup started to panic and yell about what to do. Ultimately, we quickly agreed to drive past it and turn down another road that would take us back in the direction of our cabin. The driver of the pickup called the police on our way back and gave them the location of a possibly injured person. After we got back to the cabin, the police called us, asking for more information about where we had seen the body because they went to the location we provided and couldn't find anything. We found out the next day that nothing came of their search. There was no sign of any person on that entire road. WTF. There were 4 of us in the pickup. We all saw the same thing. I've always wondered if it was a bait situation, like there were others waiting in the trees or something. Creepy,